Many IT managers are delaying their cloud decisions, but they might be delaying for the wrong reasons. Find out more on HP Tech Talk. Hi, welcome to this edition of HP Tech Talk. I'm Andy McCaskey from SDR News, and in this series we're talking with experts from Hewlett-Packard and understanding how they are defining a new style of IT. Today's topic, cloud computing, and a welcome to Chris Purcell.
Hey Andy, thanks for having me back. We got up to a pretty interesting start last week, or last time we talked. We talked about cloud computing and the significance of cloud computing within the enterprise at the moment. We talked about some very, very basic things like public, what are public, what is private, what is managed, all these different facets, which I'm hoping started to lay the foundation of what cloud is in business today.
But when you ask IT managers about cloud computing, I mean, it's a very attractive proposition. You can lower your operating costs. You don't have large capital costs. There's an increased level of responsiveness from an organization. You can serve your customers better. Why aren't people just rushing to adapt cloud computing approaches?
Well, there's been lots of predictions with lots of, the 2012 was going to be the big year for cloud. I mean, we heard the same thing for 2013. But I think fundamentally, it's a huge challenge for IT managers to shift their existing infrastructure and move it into cloud.
Is that because there's just such a large installed base in traditional hardware? Is that what's holding people back?
Well, so we've got Christian Verstrate on the phone again, and I'd love to introduce him to this discussion because Christian, as you know, has a lot of interesting perceptions about what customers are doing actually out in real business.
I think there is fundamentally two elements that play to it. One element is, yes, there is an installed base, and how can I transform that installed base to a cloud environment is something that a lot of people are actually having issues with. The other aspect is that cloud is a very different way to do IT, and there's a lot of organizational pushback to transform the organizations so that the organization becomes service-oriented, facilitating the move to cloud.
Is quality of service one of the main considerations that people are worried about?
Quality of service is one of them, but you remember we talked last time about private managed and public clouds. Things are different in the different situations. When you speak about public clouds, a lot of CIOs are afraid of security. They're afraid of compliance issues. They're afraid of getting proper support. They're afraid of all of these elements because there's a lot of unknowns. In the private clouds, they sort of start thinking, hey, how do I take this elephant and how do I start migrating what I have? And many times, they really don't know where to start. And I think that's where we can help them.
One of the driving factors of what cloud is happening, what cloud is doing in the marketplace is that it's actually getting to a point where, and we're seeing some very, very clear examples of this, is that IT is not keeping up with business. So take everything that Christian just said, but one of the basic driving points is that if IT can't keep up with business, then things start to happen.
Yeah. So to complement what you just said, the business people have seen that consumerization of IT. They get all sorts of services on their smartphone. They want the same from IT. IT is not giving it to them. They know enough about IT and about cloud that they just go and get it from somewhere else. Gartner predicts that by 2015, 35% of the IT budget will happen outside the control of the CIO. Just think about that.
And that's
about the implications.
And that's really extremely scary for an IT manager that spent the last 10 years building, data center infrastructure. Now all of a sudden, all their services are shifting outside, and now all of a sudden, not only is he losing control of those services, but at the end of the day, he's still held accountable for managing those services.
So what is the mix, and how do you see that changing in the next year or two?
Today you have two worlds. You have one world, which is the traditional IT world, that is well established and under the control of the CIO. And then you have all of these, let's call them skunk projects, for finding any better term, that are actually handled by the chief marketing officer, by some of the financial people, and a whole bunch of other people outside IT. Two scenarios are possible. One scenario is that the CIO basically becomes the one who puts the lights out on traditional IT, and all the new stuff is done outside of his control. The other one is that the CIO gets closer to the business, gets really in support of the business, and takes back the control of those quote-unquote skunk projects that have actually been done outside IT.
And we call this the IT manager becoming a builder and broker of those services in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that whole concept of building and brokering. Brokering meaning I get and I source services from all sorts of places, and transparently I give them to you out of one environment, so that you don't need to go and figure out how you get to those. You just consume them, and I'll take care of everything else in the back. That's the proactive CIOs. The other ones will basically drive themselves out of a job sooner or later.
We call this hybrid delivery. It's this mixture of traditional IT and new types of cloud services, all being wrapped together, so it's seamlessly providing the business with a new set of capabilities that an IT manager will provide in the future.
It's not about I migrate everything I have to cloud. It's going to be a coexistence of the traditional world and the cloud world for a quite some future.
How are service level agreements problematic in adoption of cloud?
So again, we have to talk about what types of cloud. So in a private cloud, well, the service level agreement is still the service level agreement the CIO gives to the business people. Where things start getting interesting is when the CIO sources services from the outside world. How can he ensure that the service level agreement the business expects from him is in line with the service level agreement that he gets from the outside service? So he has to be very, very careful in choosing particular services that provide him with service level agreement, with support, with security, with compliance elements that are in line with what he needs to give to the business.
And that's from an IT perspective, Andy. What I think where business actually gets into a lot of trouble is that when the business starts to consume services from a public cloud, they don't understand the significance of an SLA. So I think many of the problems we've seen in the past where the business has been caught with either what they posted on the private cloud, what development work they're doing on the private cloud, they haven't read the small print of the SLA. They are not IT specialists. And so they when things break, as everything does sometimes, now all of a sudden they haven't read the fine print of the SLA, and now the cloud essentially gets a bad name for itself because it's really they didn't have that strong partnership with their own IT group as they got started on this cloud venture.
As IT managers look at the landscape, how significant are standards in their decision?
Standards are huge. When you kind of think about, I'm running a business, in the IT world, it's all about standards. In fact, it's so standardized that maybe even some people complain it's over-standardized. To run your business on the cloud or in the cloud, you've got to have almost like the common gauge railroad that we experienced through the birth of railroads. In order to move haulage from one end of the country to the other, you've got to have standards, you've got to have Everyone has to be on the same gauge. You've got to have your heavy loading gear. It's all got to be working seamlessly together. And if it doesn't, then it won't go smoothly. Things won't get delivered on time. That's the thing that keeps IT managers awake at night.
Well, and it certainly looks like there's still a maturing that has to occur amongst public cloud offerings from different vendors. I would think it would be very difficult at the present time to manage across some number of public clouds.
That is correct. That is correct. Although we've seen an interesting standard actually popping up in and around OpenStack. The amount of companies that have actually accepted it and are supporting it is huge. I mean, we're over 200 at the moment. But you're right. The first incumbents in the market are all very special and all have their own environments, and they're not compatible with each other. The question that the CIO, when he takes that decision, or the business people when they take that decision, that the question they always have to ask themselves is, if I do something in that cloud, what effort will I have to take to actually take it out and take it to a different place if at one moment in time, for whatever reasons, it makes sense for me to move to somewhere else? That's the fundamental question.
Yeah. Well, I think this whole topic of vendor lock-in has got to be of tremendous concern as people are thinking about moving some portion of their operation.
Some people do, some people don't. So CIOs have gone through that in the past. They've known that. They've known the proprietary operating systems. They know all sorts of those things. So they have a tendency to look at it. Business people don't. And so business people say, hey, I'm going to use, let's say, Salesforce.com for running my CRM. Are they, when they take that decision, thinking about the fact that if 5 years from now they want to move to a different CRM system, and in the meantime they've gathered about 5 petabytes worth of data, how are they going to get that data out of Salesforce and putting into another CRM system? I'm not saying you shouldn't go to it, but you have to go to these things with your eyes wide open, realizing the implications. And a lot of people forget that side of things.
And I think, Andy, when you stand back and you ask the fundamental question about why should I even move in the first place? That's a risk. Anytime I make a change in my IT, it's a huge risk to my business. So this, taking this step, as Christian was talking about, into Salesforce.com, it is a risk, and they have to understand what they're going to be doing, and they have to assess that to see if it's even viable or not. And again, I think the fundamental question you asked at the very beginning, why aren't companies moving as rapidly? It's essentially this huge risk assessment that they're all having to go through to justify whether this is actually going to be a benefit or be detrimental to their business.
I would think that the risk that's inherent in things such as HIPAA compliance, security as far as exposure of client data, and as well as just the security of the data in general, that would still be a major, major concern.
It is the top one concerns for, I think, about the last 5 or 6 years that there have been that have been surveys around. It's always popped up as being number one. Now, the public cloud people tell you it's a fake. There shouldn't be any problems because public clouds are more secure than your own data centers. When you then ask them how they do it, the answer often comes back and saying, just trust them. Okay.
I would think that the business people would be maybe even more concerned than the technology.
Yeah, but again, the thing is, the people that understand what it takes to do cloud security, they think about it and they're getting concerned. The business people, well, they're not. Look at how many people go to Facebook. Look at how many people go to Twitter. And look at how many people go to these other places. And we know their breaches. We know data leaks. We know data is used in a variety of ways behind our back. We know all of that. But we're still doing it. That is where the consumerization of IT is actually making that a lot of people bringing their guard down when they actually start talking about security and don't really think about it, or don't, how would I say, don't look at it enough.
Or it's not even important enough for them to be attentive to it. They don't care.
Or would fit into the acceptable level of risk as far as the concerns are taken. But right. You still have a very complex environment that has to be managed. This whole notion of complexity, is that second to security on the list of concerns? Actually,
it is not. At least it's not phrased that way at the moment, because you're struggling with one thing, and that is perception. If I download an app on my mobile phone and use that app, it sounds so simple. People don't realize the complexity that sits behind that. And so, when they turn to the CIO, they say, hey, I could get this in 5 minutes on my mobile phone. Why can't you give it to me?
Well, of course, in managing all of this complexity, I think it would be a pretty daunting task, and where there's a real opportunity or a need for a skilled partner. Chris, how does this fit in?
Oh, partners are really key. So I liken it to anything you're doing for the first time. It's always good to go in there with someone that has experience and is knowledgeable. And along with going in with a partner, the importance of going in there with a plan. We have this thing called a Converged Cloud Workshop, something that we can take businesses through, really understand what their businesses are, what they're doing, everyone is different, everyone's kind of got a different DNA, but take those elements of what they want to move into the cloud, partnering with a strong partner, but then building a blueprint or a plan that they can now start to progress with. I think the challenge that some people have had in the past is that they think that moving to the cloud is maybe fairly simple. And they've taken off this big mouthful of transition, only to find that they've struggled and that transition hasn't been as successful.
Christian, what are some of the other aspects where HP can assist in this transition?
I think there is one thing to realize. You spoke about this complexity. And yes, if you build everything on your own, a cloud is very, very complex. But what you can do is actually taking an integrated set that is being provided by a vendor like HP, and we have something that we call Cloud System that actually does that facilitates and allows you to have a cloud in place faster. However, we talked about the lack of vendor locking. So what you want to do in that case is you want to make sure that that vendor that you choose is actually embracing the standards, so that if one day that vendor doesn't deliver you what you want, you can still move reasonably easily to another vendor that provides you something similar. And I think that's where things play. That's why we're actually taking Cloud System and really moving it towards and increasing the use of standards within what we actually provide to ensure you have that capability.
And Christian, what about the existing infrastructure that I've already got in my data center? We would want to move that infrastructure with us as well. We call that a heterogeneous environment.
So the second element you need, I'm glad you bring it up, beside the base being based on open systems, is actually having the capability to support heterogeneous environments. Heterogeneous hardware, heterogeneous multiple operating systems, multiple hypervisors, and so on and so on and so on. That you keep the flexibility to actually take what you already have and use it in that new environment.
And it goes back, Andy, to strengthening the point we made earlier about the importance of a hybrid delivery strategy, where I can deliver across my existing IT and through any flavor of cloud that I would want to use in the future.
You know, I'm really enjoying this opportunity to begin to absorb over time this vision of converged infrastructure. And of course, we are all recognizing that this is not something that happens overnight.
Yeah, that's right. It's something that you have to build on. And then I think that's the other, you go back to your basic question about why people aren't transitioning to the cloud as quickly. It's really having a foundation to build from. So we had a Hewlett-Packard put in a converged infrastructure strategy about 5 years ago. Not a lot of companies understood the value of that, but 5 years on, now all of a sudden these jigsaw pieces that we started to design and build against, now they all come together very seamlessly. So as you think about my existing data center, and now I want to transition into the cloud without a converged infrastructure platform, I wouldn't really be able to do that. But now these interlocking pieces now all come into play, and it's now making it a lot easier. I was going to say seamless, but I think that's too early to say that.
Yeah. Chris is absolutely correct. It's that possibility to build and use existing building blocks to really enhance your data center so that you can respond to the needs of your business people, so that they don't need to go outside to shop, but that they can shop with you is really where CIOs should take it.
Okay, well, I think this is really interesting to see how all the pieces are beginning to come together. Christian, thanks for your comments here today. Chris, when we see you again, what are we going to be talking about in the world of cloud?
Well, we promised to sort of put this foundation out, called it Converged Cloud, and we've covered it in the last couple of episodes. What we'd like to do in the future is actually start doing deep dives on, what is a private cloud, what is a public cloud, what is HP offering, and the expertise they bring to the table when we talk about these two things.
Gentlemen, thanks for joining us here today, and thanks to you for watching on HP Tech Talks. I'm Andy McCaskey for SDR News, and we'll see you next time.